My name is Walter Hensley. I am 61 years old, a retired colonel of the United States Army, and for the last 7 years I've lived in silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't think anyone would want to hear it. I believed that truth, like scars, could only be revealed when the world was ready. I was wrong. I was summoned to appear at a military tribunal again. I'd been here before years ago, standing at attention while headlines labeled me a disgrace. Back then I said nothing. I took the shame quietly. But this time was different. This time it was my son who put me there. His name is Major Ethan Hensley, 34, decorated, sharp, beloved by his peers, respected by his commanders, and ashamed of me. I sat on the witness bench, the burn of old oak against my back as Ethan stood tall on the platform, reserved for testimony. The room was packed, military officials in crisp uniforms, photographers lurking in shadows, tribunal judges perched behind a long panel, their expressions unreadable. Ethan's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Coward soldier," he said slowly and clearly, as if each word was meant to wound. He left his men behind during Operation Ironsky. He was supposed to lead them. Instead, he ran. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Someone scribbled furiously into a notebook. I didn't move. He had no visible injuries, Ethan continued, and yet he was the first to leave the field. Others stayed. Others died. But he returned, alone. There was no emotion in his tone, just ice. Walter Hensley abandoned his command. He left men to die. He does not deserve to wear the uniform he disgraced. I heard my name, but it sounded foreign, like someone else's sins were being read aloud. Then came the line I knew was coming. "Show them your face," Ethan said, pointing at me now. The room stiffened. Cameras clicked. Eyes turned to me like searchlights. I sat still. "Take off the glasses. Remove the beard. If you didn't run, then let them see what you're hiding." His words were surgical, cold. I reached for the glasses, then paused. My fingers trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of time. Slowly, I removed them. The lenses clinked softly on the wood. I reached for the false beard I had worn for years, more out of habit than necessity. I peeled it from my jaw. Gasps filled the tribunal. Someone dropped a pen. The scar ran from just above my left eyebrow across my cheek and down to the base of my neck. The skin was gnarled, shiny, pale in some spots, deep red in others. It looked like something had tried to melt me. A pause, then a voice. "Those scars," Admiral Granger murmured. He leaned forward from the judging panel, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, God." The room froze. Ethan's expression cracked for a fraction of a second. He took a step back, his jaw twitching. He had never seen it. I had never shown him. "I didn't run," I said, my voice low. "I crawled. I bled. And I carried 2 men on my back through 3 miles of enemy jungle. One of them was you." The room was silent. Ethan's eyes widened. "You don't remember," I added, "because you were unconscious. You were hit. I shielded you from the second blast. That's where this came from." I gestured to my face. No one spoke. No one moved. My words weren't loud, but they cut through the silence like a crack of thunder. I turned to the judges. I never asked to be praised. I never asked for anyone to believe me. I asked for truth. And I'm done hiding it. The tribunal chamber, with its brass lights and marble walls, suddenly felt too small for the moment that had just unfolded. The narrative Ethan had built of a cowardly father disgracing the family name had shattered. He looked at me, not like a son, not like a soldier, just a man trying to process the destruction of the version of truth he'd carried for years. For 7 years I let them say I was a disgrace. I let him believe it, because I thought protecting him from guilt was more important than protecting my name. But sometimes silence becomes a wound deeper than the scar. And now, Now the silence had ended. The tribunal was no longer judging me. It was watching Ethan, watching his face pale, watching his shoulders fall. I didn't need anyone to rise in my defense. The truth had finally stood on its own, and it was louder than anything he or I had ever said. It was 7 years ago, but I still remember the heat in my chest, the sting in my lungs, and the metallic smell of blood as soaked into my uniform. Operation Ironsky was supposed to be simple. In and out. Secure a high-value prisoner from a rebel faction in the hills of Sormak province. Intelligence had confirmed the site. Resistance was projected to be minimal. The mission brief was only 12 pages long, a bad sign in itself. Simplicity in war is usually a lie. I led a team of 9. My son Ethan was the youngest among them, eager and sharp, still believing in the black and white clarity of military orders. He had joined my unit 3 months earlier, something I neither asked for nor encouraged. But the higher-ups thought it would be an opportunity for a legacy connection. I didn't have the rank to say no. We inserted at 0200 hours under full moonlight. By 0300 we were compromised. The extraction team never got within range. The terrain was off, steep, unstable, wrong for vehicles. Our comms went out exactly 7 minutes after landing. We were isolated. And then came the ambush. The first explosion took out Ruiz, our point man, instantly. I remember his body flipping midair, weightless like a marionette before hitting the rocks. Ethan was 10 feet behind him, frozen. I shouted for him to fall back, but the second blast hit before he moved. It didn't take him out, but it threw him hard into the cliffside. His helmet cracked. Blood streamed from his temple. I got to him just as rounds began snapping past my ears. "Dad," he mumbled. His voice was soft, disoriented. "What's happening?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I had my arm around his shoulders, dragging him across the gravel toward a ridge, trying to keep my own body between him and the bullets. That's when the third explosion went off closer, hotter. Something tore through my face. I didn't feel it at first. There was only light, white and blinding, then cold. I thought I had lost my eye. I remember tasting blood. My body jolted from the shock, but I didn't stop. I just kept moving. By the time I reached cover, I had Ethan slumped over my lap and 2 other men bleeding beside us. No one was coming. Not for us. The final comm signal we got before blackout was a single phrase, "Mission scrubbed. Fall back if possible." But there was no fallback point anymore. Our evac coordinates had been changed last minute. No one told us, and I suspected even then that someone up the chain had wanted us to fail. I radioed out twice. Silence. I patched Ethan's wound as best I could. His pulse was weak. He drifted in and out. I smeared mud across my own face to stop the bleeding, tied part of my sleeve across the worst of the gash. I couldn't see clearly. The left side of my vision was nothing but fog and red. I didn't know what my face looked like yet. I only knew that I was getting colder. But I still had people to move. Over the next 6 hours, I carried them one by one. 2 miles through brush rock and enemy fire. On foot. No backup. No medevac. Just instinct. I dragged Ethan first. He was heavier than I remembered, all muscle and gear. I stumbled. Fell. Got back up. His blood soaked into my back. My own dripped steadily onto the ground. The scar came from more than just the explosion. It came from the dirt, the ash, the branches that clawed at me. As I crawled forward with 3 broken men and a burning face. By the time we reached friendly lines, I collapsed. They took Ethan from me first, loaded him into a chopper. He was unconscious. He never saw me again. I was airlifted to a separate base away from my unit, away from my command. 3 days later, I woke up in a sterile white room, bandaged and sedated. My discharge papers had already been printed. A statement had been released. The narrative had been crafted. Colonel Walter Hensley made the difficult call to withdraw in the face of overwhelming resistance. 6 men perished. 3 were rescued. That was it. I asked about the comms failure, the bad intel, the evacuation plan that never happened. I was told there was no further investigation required. My file was marked voluntary early retirement due to medical complications. They had sealed it neatly. I was offered a quiet ceremony, a folded flag, a final salute. I declined. I went home instead. Not to my real home, not to the one with polished boots and brass medals. I went to Montana, bought a cabin, cut my own firewood, built silence around me. Ethan recovered fully. I never got to see him in the hospital, never spoke to him. When I reached out, he sent back one message: "I hope someday you explain why you ran." That line stayed with me, echoed every morning I looked in the mirror. But I didn't explain. I didn't want him to carry the truth that I had bled and almost died to save him, that the scar on my face was the reason he was still breathing, that the man he despised had never left him behind. He was so certain of the story they gave him, so eager to live outside my shadow. I let him. Because I believed that protecting him from guilt was more important than protecting my pride. But silence, no matter how noble it feels at first, begins to rot when truth is buried too long. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want medals. But when the tribunal summoned me again, this time with my own son as a witness against me, I knew it was no longer about me. It was time to tell the story, the full one, and let the scars do the rest. After the mission, the official narrative spread fast. 6 men dead, 3 rescued, mission deemed strategically compromised. No inquiry, no accountability. What wasn't said became louder than what was. I became the silence everyone filled with their own version of failure, especially Ethan. He never called, never visited, not even a letter. The last time I heard his voice was through a sterile hospital speaker when he was being wheeled past my ICU bed unconscious. By the time he woke up, I had already been transferred. He didn't ask for me. He didn't want to. He gave one press statement a few months later when he received his commendation. I watched it from my kitchen, the glow of the TV flickering against my walls like ghosts. "I'm grateful to be alive," he said, crisp in uniform, standing before an American flag. "But some men chose to stay and fight and some didn't. I learned a lot about leadership that day." He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. That was his way of burying me, not with bullets, with implication. I didn't blame him. He was a soldier raised in the shadows of expectations I never meant to cast. I was a hard man, not cruel, but distant. And maybe that distance turned to doubt when the headlines came. Still, I waited. Holidays passed, birthdays. My mailbox stayed empty. At first, I thought maybe he was trying to make sense of it all, that maybe he was wrestling with what really happened. But then I saw him again, this time on television, a guest analyst for a military think tank. He spoke about battlefield decisions, sacrifice, cowardice. He was building a brand. And I was the cautionary tale he never had to name. In a way, he became everything I once was: sharp, decorated, confident, but colder, polished like a blade. He was promoted faster than most, invited to speak at West Point, wrote articles on leadership in high-stakes environments. He carried himself like a man trying to erase something me. Every interview, every published piece, every lecture was another inch of distance. He no longer lived in my shadow. He stood on top of it, and I let him, because I thought that maybe it was better this way. Better to be misunderstood than to drag him back into a truth that might hurt more than help. Still, there were nights, quiet Montana nights, when I'd sit on my porch with a glass of bourbon and wonder if I had made a mistake. Not in the jungle, not in saving him, but in disappearing. I wasn't afraid of being hated. I was afraid that if I told him the truth, that I had almost died, carrying him through gunfire, that the scar on my face was the price I paid to keep him breathing, he'd never forgive himself. He would see it every time he looked at me. So I wore the beard, the glasses, the silence. Not out of shame, out of protection. It's a strange thing, being both the villain in someone's story and the reason they're still alive. It tears at you. Eventually, I stopped checking the mail, stopped watching the news. I built a life that didn't require explaining who I used to be. People in town knew me as the quiet guy who fixed his own truck and chopped his own wood. They didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. Until one morning a letter arrived, not from Ethan, from a Pentagon lawyer. I was being called to testify at a special military review tribunal, a request for voluntary appearance regarding Operation Ironsky. I almost threw it out. Then I saw the signature, Major Ethan Hensley. He was on the panel. He was the one who requested I appear, not to defend me, to confirm his findings. He was building his case publicly now. The failed colonel, the cowardly father, the man who ran. I held the letter for a long time. Then I walked to the mirror. I hadn't seen my face in full in years, not really. I removed the glasses, peeled off the false beard. The scar was still there, pale, thick, angry. I stared at it, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to hide it. I had lived in silence long enough. It was time to make them hear it. 3 weeks before the tribunal, I received a package. No return address, no markings except a smudged postal stamp from Arlington, Virginia. Inside a manila envelope, a flash drive, and a single note typed in courier font. You deserve the truth to be told. Use this or don't. But I was there. JL. I stared at the note, turning it over. Blank on the back. No phone number. No signature beyond the initials. I plugged the flash drive into my old laptop, half expecting it to be empty or worse, infected. But there it was. A folder labeled Opa Ironsky Unredacted. Inside were documents I hadn't seen in 7 years. The original incident reports from the field, medical evaluations from the frontline medic who treated me, photos of my injuries far more detailed than I remembered, and most damning drone footage. Video files with timestamps that matched our mission window. The footage showed the terrain we had landed in, and then clear as day the moment the ambush began. The audio was grainy, but I could hear my voice. Pull back, maintain cover, Ethan's down, Ruiz is gone, we need evac now. I watched myself crawl across rock and mud, dragging Ethan behind me. Then came the second file, more critical. It showed the moment I took shrapnel to the face. You could see the blast, the smoke, the way my body shielded the 3 men behind me. I staggered, then stood back up. I carried Ethan through fire. There was no sign of retreat, no panic, only controlled, deliberate movement. I watched that clip over and over. 7 years I had doubted my own memory. 7 years of silence, and now cold digital proof. The final document was a field medic's log. It noted Colonel Hensley suffered extensive facial trauma from explosive ordnance while shielding team members, carried wounded over 2.7 miles without assistance, refused morphine, unconscious upon arrival at FOB. Lieutenant James Larkins. JL. I remembered him, a young medic, quiet, precise. His hands barely shook when he stitched my jaw shut. He must have kept a copy of everything. And now he had sent it to me. I sat there for hours sifting through every page, every still image. My face stared back at me from angles I had never seen. Burnt, bleeding, resolute. That wasn't the face of a coward. That was a man doing what needed to be done. The next day I drove into town and printed everything. Color copies. Full resolution. I organized them in a binder. No frills, no notes, just the facts. Then I wrote a single-page letter addressed to the tribunal. This is the complete and unaltered record of my actions during Operation Ironsky. I have no intention of arguing, pleading, or justifying. I am submitting this as my testimony. Respectfully, Colonel Retwell Walter Hensley. I sealed it all in an envelope. But I didn't stop there. I called Lieutenant Larkins. It took 2 days and a dozen emails, but I finally reached him through a veterans medical network. He picked up on the second ring. "Colonel Hensley." His voice cracked. "Sir, I wasn't sure you'd call. You sent the drive." "Yes, sir." I held on to it. They told me not to keep records, but something didn't sit right. I couldn't delete what I saw. "You're willing to testify," he paused. "If it means clearing your name, yes. And not just yours. What happened that night, what they did to our whole unit, someone needs to answer for that." I didn't say anything for a long time. "You still in Virginia?" "Yes, sir. I can be there for the hearing." "Good." Before we hung up, he said one more thing. "I remember you carrying him, Colonel. I didn't know that was your son, but I never forgot the look on your face. That wasn't fear, that was something else. It felt strange to be believed. Strange and a little dangerous because belief is what I had stopped allowing myself to feel." I booked a ticket to D.C. the next day. This time, I wouldn't show up quietly. I wasn't coming as the disgraced officer who sat in the back row and hoped to be forgotten. I was bringing evidence. I was bringing truth. And I was bringing the scars I had hidden for too long. On the flight, I kept thinking about Ethan, about the boy I used to train in the backyard with wooden swords, about the man who now stood at a podium and called me a coward. I didn't hate him. I didn't even resent him. He had built his world on the pieces I left behind. But now he was going to have to face the fact that his foundation was cracked. He had used my silence as proof of guilt. Now my voice would become the evidence he couldn't escape. When I arrived in Washington, I walked past the marble steps of the Tribunal Hall with my binder in hand. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt ready. Ready to step back into the fire. Only this time, it would be my truth that burned through the lies. The tribunal chamber hadn't changed. Same wood paneling, same vaulted ceiling with dusty light filtering through the narrow windows. Same heavy silence that seemed to smother breath before it left your chest. But this time, I wasn't sitting in the shadows. They called my name. I stood and walked forward with the binder in my hand, the scar on my face fully visible. No beard, no glasses, no armor. The murmurs began before I reached the stand. I could feel them confused, curious, judgmental. Some were probably seeing me for the first time without the filters of rumor press or shame. The tribunal panel sat at the far end. In the middle, Admiral Granger, stoic, unreadable but alert. To his right, Major Ethan Hensley, my son. He didn't look at me. Not at first. I stood at the witness platform, opened my binder, and placed it on the table. "Colonel Hensley," Admiral Granger began, "you've submitted new materials for review this morning?" "Yes, sir," I said. My voice was calm, no tremor. "Unredacted documentation and visual evidence relating to Operation Ironsky. Do you wish to make a statement?" I looked at my son. His eyes finally met mine. "I do," I said. "I didn't read from a paper. I spoke from memory, because when you've carried a truth in silence for 7 years, it doesn't fade. It only sharpens. I led a unit of 9 men into a mission compromised from the start. We were given faulty terrain intel. No air support. Communications failed within minutes. We were ambushed. 6 died. 3 survived." I paused. One of them was my son. The room shifted. Attention sharpened. During the firefight, Ethan was wounded, unconscious. I carried him and 2 others through nearly 3 miles of terrain under enemy threat. I sustained a severe facial injury while shielding them from a secondary explosion. The scar is the result. I pointed to my face. Gasps. Audible now. A camera clicked. I was evacuated under medical duress. I was not debriefed. I was discharged before any full inquiry was conducted. I remained silent because I believed at the time protecting my son's career and conscience was more important than protecting my own name. Ethan leaned forward slightly. I submitted no defense. I gave no interviews. I let the silence shape the narrative. I reached into the binder and held up the first document. This is the field medic report from Lieutenant James Larkins. It confirms the nature of my injuries and the circumstances of evacuation. Then the next. These are images from drone footage taken during the mission. They show the precise moment of the ambush, the extraction, and my actions throughout. Admiral Granger motioned for the documents to be passed up. A clerk moved quickly. I continued. The footage shows me carrying Major Hensley and Corporal Green across hostile ground. It shows me taking shrapnel. It shows what really happened. For the first time, Ethan's face changed. Not entirely, but his brow tensed. His mouth twitched just slightly. I opened the final folder. This, I said, is a full time-stamped log verified by Lieutenant Larkins, matching every movement and radio call we attempted that night. I stepped back from the microphone. I submit this not for personal redemption, but because this tribunal deserves the full truth. So does my son. The room was dead quiet. Admiral Granger held up a photo, one showing me bloodied and staggering, carrying Ethan across a ridge. "Major Hensley," he said, suddenly turning to my son. "Do you recognize this image?" Ethan looked down at the photo. He took longer than I expected. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "Yes, sir. That's me. Do you recall these moments?" He hesitated. "No, sir. I lost consciousness during the second blast. And were you aware prior to today of the Colonel's role in your evacuation?" "No, sir." Granger leaned back. "I would like the panel to take a short recess," he said. "We'll review these documents and footage." He banged the gavel once. People stood whispering, stepping out. The press hovered, unsure if they could approach. I sat down, exhaling slowly. Ethan stayed seated. He didn't move. Then after a moment, he turned to me. "You carried me," he said quietly. "I did," I answered. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were building a life, a future. I didn't want you to carry guilt." He looked down at the floor. "I said things. I heard them. I believed them." "I know." A long silence. Ethan spoke again. "I thought you ran. I really believe that." "I know," I said. "And I let you. I made you into a villain." "No. I let silence become the villain. That was my choice." He didn't look at me, but his posture softened. The soldier in him folded a little. The sun began to emerge. 30 minutes later, the panel returned. Admiral Granger looked around the room, then addressed us. "We have reviewed the submitted materials, including visual evidence and medical documentation. Based on the weight of this new evidence, this tribunal finds that Colonel Hensley's actions during Operation Ironsky were consistent with valor duty and the protection of fellow soldiers." He paused. "Effective immediately, all prior disciplinary remarks are expunged. His record will reflect commendation, not condemnation." He looked at me directly. "You should have spoken sooner, Colonel." I nodded. "Perhaps. But sometimes, sir, it takes time to earn the silence back." The chamber didn't erupt. There was no standing ovation, just stillness. And sometimes stillness is more powerful. As I left the room, Ethan stood beside me. He didn't say anything at first, just walked with me step for step. Outside in the cold hallway, he finally asked, "Can I see the footage I handed him, the flash drive? I think you need to." He nodded. He didn't salute. He didn't embrace me. But his voice was different now. "I'll walk you to the car." We didn't talk much on the walk to the parking lot. The weight of everything said and unsaid hung in the air between us like fog. My boots echoed off the marble floor. Ethan's footsteps matched mine, slower than his usual pace. He was always brisk, calculated. But not now. Now he moved like someone rethinking the shape of the world. Outside, the air was sharp. Late autumn in D.C. carried a kind of dry, honest chill. At the car, I opened the door but didn't get in. I leaned against it, watching the clouds pass. Ethan stood beside me. Was it really 3 miles? He asked quietly. Closer to 4, I said. But who's counting? He gave a faint laugh. Just a breath. Not quite humor. Not quite grief. And the scar, he asked. It happened when the second blast, I said. I turned my body toward the ridge when I saw the glint of the device. Shielded you in green. Took it to the face. Probably saved all 3 of us. He nodded slowly, processing. I never knew, he said. I thought you abandoned us. I know you did. And you never tried to correct me. You wouldn't have believed me. He didn't deny it. I was angry, he admitted. Not just about the mission. About you. About growing up under your silence. I wasn't always good at being loud in the right ways, I said. Or soft when I should have been. Being a father and a commander don't always share the same instincts. He turned to me, his voice lower. You didn't just protect us that day, did you? I looked at him. What do you mean, the silence? He said. You didn't stay quiet to protect me from guilt. You stayed quiet because if people knew the truth about how the mission was planned, how we were set up, it would have exposed something higher up. I didn't answer right away. Because he was right. He had always been sharp. There were orders, I said. Missing signatures, delayed intel drops, an evac plan that was adjusted last minute without communication. I filed questions after the mission, no response. Then they retired me. Gently, quietly. You were a whistleblower, he said. No, I corrected. I was a soldier trying to understand why his men died. But if I pushed harder, I would have taken you down with me. Your name was attached to that mission, even if you weren't leading it. Ethan looked away, jaw clenched. They would have buried me too, he said. I nodded. That's why I left it alone, I said. I let the silence be my punishment. Or my shield. I don't know anymore. A long silence followed. Wind moved through the trees nearby. Somewhere a flag flapped against its pole. I wish I had known sooner, he finally said. No, I replied. You weren't ready to hear it, and I wasn't ready to say it. He nodded slowly. And now it's out, I said. And that's enough. He looked at me again, really looked. Your face, he said softly. I never saw the scar. I mean, not really. And now I can't stop seeing it. It's a part of me, I said, but not the biggest part. It's what made me, he said. He didn't mean biologically. He meant that day, that moment, that sacrifice. I didn't correct him. I reached into my coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old yellowed, the edges soft from years of being handled. I wrote this the night I got out of the hospital. I said, didn't know who to send it to. Figured you might want it now. He unfolded it carefully. It was only a few lines. A kind of prayer. A confession. A father's goodbye written in silence. I watched him read it. When he finished, he looked up. His eyes were glassy but steady. Thank you, he said, for what I asked, for carrying me, for not making me carry this until I was strong enough. We stood like that for a while. 2 men, a father and son. One scarred on the outside, one on the inside. Both healing. Will you testify again, he asked. About the rest, about the setup? The intel failures, I will, I said. But only if you stand next to me. He straightened his back. I will, he said. We shook hands, not the cold, distant military kind, but the kind that means something real has been exchanged. As he turned to leave, I said one more thing. Ethan. He stopped. You didn't destroy me in there. He looked over his shoulder. I know, he said, but I came close. I smiled. Close doesn't count. The tribunal's decision didn't make headlines. There was no press conference, no military ceremony to reinstate my honor. And I didn't want one. Redemption isn't a parade. It's quiet. It shows up in the spaces where shame used to live. In the silence after a conversation you never thought you'd have. In the weight that slowly lifts off your chest without anyone noticing. My military record was amended. The official file now reads, Colonel Walter Hensley Commendation for Bravery Under Fire, Operation Ironsky. But I didn't frame it, didn't hang it on a wall. I placed the folder in a drawer at home underneath old photos and medals I no longer wear. What mattered to me wasn't the paper. It was the shift in Ethan's eyes when he looked at me. We didn't become best friends overnight. Rebuilding a bridge takes longer than burning it. But the silence between us was no longer hollow. It had texture now, weight, meaning. 2 weeks after the tribunal, he drove up to Montana. No warning. I found him on my porch holding a six-pack and looking like he'd just run a mile through memory. You grill, he asked. Only when I trust the company, I replied. He stayed the weekend, helped chop wood. Didn't flinch when I took off the jacket and he saw the rest of the scarring along my collar. He asked questions slowly, carefully. I answered them one by one. And when he left, he didn't shake my hand. He hugged me. That was the moment. Not the tribunal, not the footage, not the scar, that. A son embracing the man he once condemned. Months passed. I spoke once at a local veterans gathering. Nothing official, just a room of worn hands and tired eyes listening. I didn't tell them about medals or missions. I spoke about silence and scars. Afterward, one man came up to me, mid-60s Navy, judging by the gait and the hat. My son hasn't talked to me in 12 years, he said. Maybe I'll send him a letter. Even if he tears it up, maybe I'll still be lighter. That's the thing, people forget about truth. It doesn't always heal immediately, but it always stops the bleeding. In time, Ethan submitted a full report to the Department of Defense. With my support, he requested a review of all compromised missions from the Ironsky timeline. He named names, questioned protocols, risked his own credibility. I watched him testify. This time he stood alone, not as a son, not as a soldier seeking revenge, but as a man who finally understood that truth, even when it hurts, is the only foundation worth building on. It took me 61 years to say some things out loud, but I've learned something about silence. Silence can be powerful. It can protect. It can preserve dignity, but it can also become a prison. I wore my scar like a mask for too long, believing it would protect my son from shame. But the shame was never mine to carry. The truth was. And when I finally let that truth breathe, it didn't just set me free. It set him free too. The past doesn't disappear. The missions, the mistakes, the moments where we failed or were failed, they stay. But they don't have to define us. Not if we're willing to face them. Not if we're willing to be seen. So if you ask me now what I regret most, it's not the silence. It's how long I let it speak for me. Because in the end, the only thing louder than a lie repeated long enough is the truth spoken once with conviction. And I finally found the voice to say it.